Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Cregger, and I'm going to be reading chapter 34 of The Adventures of a South Pole Pig. The next morning, it wasn't the cold or the hunger pains that woke Flora. It wasn't the soft meow or the delicious smell of food in her dreams. It was a big sloppy lick from a big sloppy tongue. "Oscar!" Flora squealed and jumped up in a spray of powder. Sophia yowled in surprise at being woken this way, but she soon joined Flora in dancing around their friend. Alaric stood smiling a short way off. He was still hooked to the sled while Oscar's line lay in the snow. "I knew you would find us," shouted Flora. "I knew you'd come back the same way you went." Oscar's wagging tail flew up. "What are you two doing out here?" "Looking for you." Sophia ran with her tail high to Alaric and climbed his legs until she was in his arms. Alaric laughed. "We were afraid you wouldn't be strong enough to make it." Flora bumped Oscar's chin with her nose and got another lick in return. "You don't know how tough an old dog can be," said Oscar. But Flora thought he looked run down, exhausted even. "We wanted to help you get the food, but we lost your tracks," said Flora. "Well, it's a good thing you left some tracks yourself, because otherwise we would have passed you right by. We started back only today, and the sled is a lot heavier." Flora held her breath for a moment. "You found the food?" She looked over at the sled and her mouth began watering. Alaric had unwrapped the load and was giving Sophia something. Then he waded through the deep snow to deliver 2 frozen fish to Flora. Those 2 fish were the sweetest things she could ever remember tasting. Alaric stayed close while she ate, and when she was done, bent down and hugged her. "You are one crazy pig, you know that? You disappear and then show up at the wildest times. What are you doing out here?" Alaric walked back to the sled, tossed Flora 2 more fish, and then whistled. Oscar trudged his way to his pull line. Alaric hooked him to his harness, and they started out, the boy and the dog side by side, and the sled behind with Sophia on top. They could only creep. Flora watched for another moment and then plowed through the snow until she was out in front of Oscar. The food had revived her, and she was determined to be helpful. She was going to make a path for him. She knew getting through the deep powder would be even harder for Oscar with the heavy load. Every step she took packed the snow down and made it easier for her friend. Knowing this made the work easier for her too. But being homemade, the sled didn't slide as smoothly as it should have. Sometimes Alaric stashed his pull line on the food box and dropped behind to push. When they finally passed the stretch of deep drifts and were back on more solid snow, the company stopped for a breather. Flora made her way to where Sophia had hopped down and was watching over Oscar. He hadn't bothered to wait for Alaric to take off the rope before collapsing. Flora was alarmed to hear the rattling in his throat again. "Oscar, you don't sound so good," she said. He didn't answer. He was too busy trying to catch his breath. Alaric knelt by the dog's side. "Here you go, boy. Let's get that line off you." He unfastened the rope and rubbed Oscar's side for a few minutes. Then he went to check on the food boxes. "Pulling is like medicine," panted Oscar. "I think you might be getting a little too much medicine on this trip," said Sophia. "Can't you take it easier?" Oscar didn't say more, and all too soon Alaric came back and hooked him up. The dog struggled to his feet. Before long, they came to the field of ice crystals. Flora hadn't noticed the leather booties on Oscar's feet until now, but there they were, just as Sophia had said. The icy crust that supported the crystals was thick enough to hold Flora and Oscar's weight, but the much heavier sled kept breaking through, causing the runners to end up stuck in the soft snow underneath. When this happened, Alaric had to yank the sled back through the crust and find a new path. They would travel only a short distance before the sled would break through again. There was nothing Flora could do to help. Finally, Alaric leaned against the sled. Night's coming anyway. Stumbling forward, he unhooked Oscar, who just lay on the snow with his sides heaving. Alaric brought out a tent and a small stove. Soon supper was cooking, and Flora could almost taste the warm fish stew. It might have been a happy time, Flora thought. They were rescuers coming back to save the day. They had enough to eat, but there was no cheer in the small camp. Flora and Sophia stayed near Oscar, who didn't move from where he had dropped. When supper was ready, he wouldn't eat. His throat was still rattling. Come on, boy, I'm depending on you, Alaric coaxed. You're my engine. I didn't work you too hard, did I? When it was time to sleep, Alaric carried him inside the tent. Flora poked her head through the opening. The boy had made a bed of blankets for Oscar next to his own bed. You'll feel better tomorrow, buddy, he said. Sophia stepped into the tent and curled up at the dog's side. Alaric crawled inside his blankets and patted the space on the other side of him. Come on, Pig, there's room for everyone, and this tent needs all the body heat it can get. Flora lay beside Alaric, thinking about the captain. How was he doing without the body heat of a pig to warm him? Then she listened to the rough sound of Oscar's breathing a long time before she went to sleep. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed chapter 34.